Welcome, all of you. So thank you for joining this webinar. As you see on the screen, the title is Why and How to Submit a Nomination for the 7 Most Endangered Programme 2022. I'm Sara Zanini, I work at Europa Nostra, and today with Guy Close, the Executive Vice President of Europa Nostra, we will be your speakers for this webinar. First of all, let me also introduce my colleague, Manon Richard, which will help us today from a technical point of view. In case of issues with the system or with Zoom, you can write her. And of course, you can also, she will paste in the chat some kind of housekeeping rules and some suggestions for you to follow during the webinar to ensure a kind of smooth continuation of the event. And please note, as you might have seen already from the system, that the webinar is being recorded. So if you don't want to be recorded, either you switch off your camera and change your name, please. So now, until we start, few minutes until all participants joins, I would like to ask my colleague Manon to share the video, the very short video that we have for the call for nomination 7 Most Endangered 2022. So let me just, okay, so Manon, you have the video. Thank you, Manon. So let me just share my screen again, and we should be, I think, ready to start now. Well, then let me just guide you through the structure of this webinar. Okay. So today we will cover with you a few insights on the 7 Most Endangered program. So we will have an overview and, let's say, a history of the program, background, and then we will get into the procedure and the timeline for this specific edition. How to prepare your nomination, some tips or common mistakes, and then towards the end we will have some time for the Q&A for your questions. So now I would like to invite Mr. Guy Close, the Executive Vice President of Europa Nostra, to join me. He will cover the first part of this presentation of this webinar. So Guy, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Hello, I'm very happy to see all of you here for this webinar. I'm particularly happy also to see a few people I know, Pete, obviously, Mario, but then Dimitris, I think we have met also in Greece, and Helen Kirk, I think I remember your name from one of the nominations in the past. So what are we talking about? The 7 Most Endangered Programme. It is a campaign by a civil society organization, Europa Nostra, to save Europe's endangered heritage through increasing, on the one hand, the visibility of those sites, and second, that way also to increase the credibility. The idea is to trigger action then in order to find a sustainable conservation and use or reuse, to take a more modern word. And if we go to the next slide, please, then if you look at the figures, the 7 Most Endangered Programme was established in 2013 with the support of the Institute of the European Investment Bank and of the Creative Europe Programme. So far, we have selected 43 threatened monuments and heritage sites from 26 countries all over Europe. And we have received a grand total of some 155 nominations so far. That means that on average, we receive 25, 26 nominations each round. And if one of you likes to do small mathematics, you will say, "Hopla, but 7 times 6 or 6 times 7 makes 42 and not 43. We had one year decided to add also Venice as an 8th super endangered monument. So that explains why we had 43 in total. What is important perhaps to stress is the 7 Most Endangered Programme. It is not a funding program. We don't have deep pockets, so to say, but it is a catalyst for joint action and for awareness raising. Now, two things are important in this context. Joint action means you will have to, the nominator plays a very important role, not only for nominating, but also later on for going through the process once selected. And second, joint action and awareness raising is not by itself funding, but of course it can open ways also for further discovering further funding sources, and experience shows it often does. If you look here now, the next slide, which you have here, number 5, it shows you the map of the most endangered sites, which so far were selected in the various rounds. And you can see it basically covers Europe at large. At large means including, for instance, Russia. You will see there one dot, which is close to Kaliningrad, one project selected there, but you also find projects in the Caucasus, in Turkey. So it goes well beyond the EU. Our definition of Europe is the one used by the Council of Europe. Now, I might perhaps do a rapid comparison with another activity of Europa Nostra, which some of you may know, and which has been existing for decades, meaning for decades we have had a situation where, an activity of Europa Nostra, where an award was given for particularly well done conservation or other cultural heritage oriented activities. So each year you have something like 30 such awards being given. Now, those awards, they of course can serve as inspiration and as a power of example for endangered heritage, but they have no direct impact on endangered heritage, whereas the 7 Most Endangered is particularly oriented at those. So you could say it is the other, a newer face, so to say, of the Europa Nostra coin. On the one hand, give a prize to particularly well done things. On the other hand, take care of projects which are of sites which are in a particularly bad situation. And if we can move on to the next slide, please. There's a little bit, so to say, the latest news on it. As from this year, the program runs again, I must say, because we had started that way in 2013. It works again on a yearly basis. So now we are we'll be in our 7th edition. So by the end of next year, we'll have 50 projects. And we also, what is new is that selected sites, as from this year on, are eligible for an heritage grant from the European Investment Bank of up to 10,000 euros. Now, that will definitely not cover the cost for saving those projects, but it can be very interesting as a seed money in order to get across some kind of first obstacle and to launch the project at a larger scale. And perhaps a few, if you go to the next slide, please. Just to give you a few examples to show you a little bit, on the one hand, some projects of the past, but also to explain a little bit what has worked, what has not worked, and to draw some conclusions from there. So the one on the left side is a project from 2014. It's the synagogue of Subotica in Serbia. In the meantime, so it is a synagogue from 1902 in the so-called Hungarian Art Nouveau style. It has been basically saved. It's finished, the project. Interesting is, on the one hand, the funding was ultimately given by the Hungarian government for a project in Serbia. Now, that was not only interesting in terms of funding, it was also interesting as the architectural style was Hungarian Art Nouveau. The Hungarians knew, of course, better how to deal with this from a technical point of view than it would have been the case otherwise. The second project, a bridge, is from our list of 2016. It is the so-called Colbert Swing Bridge in Dieppe in Normandy. I'm talking about a 70-meter long bridge from the times of August Eiffel. Well, he was not the architect for it, but it's from that time. And the bridge was to be replaced by a more modern one. We could avoid that. And indeed, in the meantime, that bridge is a national monument, so it's safe for the next decades to come. One of our success case, or another second one of our success case, I could say. The same thing is true for the third one. That is from our 2014 again series, and it is the Carillon of the Mafra National Palace close to Lisbon in Portugal. There you have a building from the 18th century with a worldwide unique set of 120 cast bronze bells. And there were some structural problems also to the tower, so that had to be redone. And it was indeed inaugurated in the spring of this year. So again, mission accomplished. Now, it doesn't work always quite that well, because to give you an example, the fourth case is the National Theatre in Tirana, where which was let's say, the scene for major discussion and conflict, disagreement, let's say, between, on the one hand, the civil society in Albania, but also the government, the city, the president, which were on different sides in it. And ultimately, it was destroyed in the morning of the 17th of May of last year. So the theater is not there anymore, but tongues would say that there is some kind of land speculation behind it, but let's leave that aside. In any way, the project does not exist anymore. There are now new debates on what could be to build another theater, new one on that site, but I leave that open for the time being. And perhaps another three examples. If we go to the next slide, please. So we have on the left, we have a project from 2018. It's the Buzluca monument in Bulgaria. It's a project from 1981, so fairly recently. It started as a monument to the Communist Party of Bulgaria, and then became a little bit, derelict, as you can see. When we selected that one, we earned a number of raised eyebrows, a little bit in the sense, Opa Nostra, what do you have to do with the Communist Party, and what with this building, what is to be done with it, etc. In the meantime, the Nominator has created quite a forceful team. I think Mario Eimrich, who is with us, is part of it, and has launched a number of interesting activities, has organized 2 grants by the Getty Foundation from California. There will be a conference held next to it by the end of this month. So it's an interesting case where you kind of raise first the visibility of a project, which before many people did not even know that it existed. And second, also you raise the credibility of the case. And we are not yet there declaring it safe, but I think the chances clearly have improved over the last few years. And a similar development may happen with the second one, that is from 2016. It's the convent of St. Anthony of Padua. It's located in the Estremadura in Spain. And it was, as I said, selected in 2016. There were some ownership problems, so it took some time to arrange that. But the latest news, and latest news means 2 weeks ago, is that indeed the regional government has taken over now the ownership, has made available some first small money. So we are not yet there, but still the things might well move in the right direction. And we hope the same thing to be true for the last project here, that is from our 2021, so the most recent ones. It's in Skopje, the post office, which was built in what is called the brutalist style, the same as Buzluca, by the way. It was built in 1974. Ultimately, it represents the survival of the city after a major earthquake some 10 years before. But it fell victim to a fire in 2013, and since then is basically empty and small and slowly falling into ruins. And so we are doing our best in order now to launch that project. I might perhaps take the opportunity, and a little bit on the base of the examples I've just shown, to also stress how much it makes a difference why a site, why a monument is being endangered. The most frequent case is because of neglect. Simply a site is there, in a way nobody cared for some time for it or had the possibility to care in any real material way. And so there is a slow decline. The good thing about such a case is nobody really is against doing something, only nobody got to action. It can take some time to overcome the neglect, and I think the case here in the middle, the Spanish convent, is a good example for that. But with the time, those efforts can be organized and a sustainable solution can be found. What is a bit different is what I call, not sure if the expression is the best one, project sites where there is a disruptive interest, a conflicting interest, so to say. That can be like, for instance, land speculation. Somebody simply wants to tear down the building. I mentioned it in the case of Tirana National Theatre, take down the building and do something else with which you can make more money. Ultimately, it can also be a case of overinvestment. The Dieppe Bridge is a good case. It could have been replaced by a new one, which would have been more expensive, but ultimately we could prove there was no need for that. In case this way you have such a situation, ultimately either you can convince the other side that it's better to keep to the old monument, and that can even be fairly rapidly. Dieppe was a question of less than 1 year to save the project, or you lose. You also have that case. Tirana is one example where we lost. We had a similar case in Oslo, the so-called Y block. We have the case of Hasan Cave in eastern Turkey, where a very old city simply in the meantime is covered by 50 meters of the waters of a dam on the Tigris river. So either you win rapidly in such cases or you lose definitively. Last case, which is more rare, is where we have real kind of where the site is involved in some kind of more international conflict. The one which kind of keeps us busy at this moment is the Dečani monastery in Kosovo, where there's a question of Kosovo versus Serbia relations, but we could also imagine something similar. So, for instance, if we had such a project right now, let's say at the border between Armenia and Azerbaijan. By the way, hello, Rizvan, I see you have joined in the meantime. Nice to see you. So those are a little bit the three categories. You also have a side category where you have a major disaster, an earthquake, strong fire, but typically they fall then afterwards into the neglected category. One point perhaps still to say also, what does not count for the 7 most endangered is the age of the project. The oldest one goes back for 10,000 years. That would have been Hassan Cave, even though obviously there are no buildings left from 10,000 years ago, but you have there a city, one of the oldest ones in the world, you could say, where there has been continuous settlement over that period. As I said, we lost that battle. The youngest one is Uzlutza, which is from 1981. So you see, it really can span quite a long phase in history. Last point, perhaps, if we can move to the next slide, please. We have this, I mentioned it at the beginning, the cooperation with the EIB Institute. So the Institute of the European Investment Bank is what other banks have as their foundation. So it promotes, supports social, cultural, and academic initiatives with European, and not only European in the meantime, indeed, stakeholders and the public at large. And as from last year, the Institute, which had been associated from the very beginning, has increased its support to help saving Europe's heritage in danger. And it's also on the websites either of Europa Nostra or of the EIB Institute that you can find a lot of information on the 7 most endangered. In particular, you can find the various reports done on the projects in the past, the various updates done, etc. So it's worthwhile looking at one of the 2 websites. And I think with that, I would pass on to Sarah in order to now talk more about the practical procedure and the timeline. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Guy, for your presentation of the 7 most endangered program. So now let's move indeed to another part of our webinar, the procedure and timeline of this 2022 edition. So we can start with the eligibility, first of all. So as Guy was mentioned, we cover, let's say, the wider Europe area. So eligible countries, you have the full list there in the slide, are the member states of the Council of Europe. And so you can also consult via the link in the chat all the countries and the direct link. Nomination can be submitted for the 7 most endangered program by these categories that you can see in the slide. So Europa Nostra country representation or member or associate organization. Otherwise, public and private bodies that are active in the heritage field in general and are located in countries where Europa Nostra is not yet represented. The member organization of the European Heritage Alliance, and my colleague will post again the link to the full list in the chat, and also individual members of Europa Nostra, which can be all kind of individual members, including young members as well. For what concerns the endangered areas and site typologies, as you can see, we have kind of different typologies that are included that you can nominate, from places of worship to industrial complex or park and gardens, cultural landscapes, and also intangible heritage. So far, we received only 1 nomination for intangible heritage, but of course, I mean, we welcome this category with the site typologies, let's say, more and more as well, as it's really endangered. And as Guy was saying, also regarding these areas and site typologies, there is no specific, let's say, historical time covered or age of this site, as sites goes from a variety of different ages, and these are covered. Also, you can see from our website the nature of the past projects that were selected. For what concerns the criteria of selection, so these sites are selected taking into account several criteria and factors. So we have here in the slide them listed. It can be related to the cultural value and the significance of the site, which can be both at local level or at European significance. The urgency and the danger that the site is facing at the moment when it's nominated, but also the engagement and the commitment at the local level. And it's an important factor because public and private stakeholders might be directly, should be directly involved to save the site. And so this is another criteria that we take into account. And obviously, the potential of the site to act as a catalyst. So a kind of the site has can have the potential to provide an active action, a positive action in the country and in the local area where it's located in terms of social economic development. Then we can have a look here at the timeline, and especially the timeline for this edition of the program. So as you all know, in June now we opened the call for nomination for this edition, and the deadline is the 17th of September 2021. Then how the process evolved, you see here in the timeline, we have this evaluation process that is done by an international advisory panel, which is composed of experts in different topics that goes from history to architecture to finance and management, for instance, and they evaluate all the nominations that we receive. And the result is a short list of sites. So as Guy was mentioning before, on an average, we receive between 25 on an average nominations each year. They get evaluated, and the advisory panel shortlist up to 14 sites for this shortlist. And then between January and March, usually it starts what we call campaign and advocacy time. So it's the possibility for these sites, shortlisted sites, to get awareness and raising awareness, and also a bit of advertise on this short list and try to do some advocacy, let's say, until March, where there is the final selection, which is done by the board of Europa Nostra, and will be announced indeed in between March and April 2022 in this case. And then we go to the post-selection process. So the follow-up of all the 7 selected sites. For each of these sites, of the 7 sites, we create a dedicated project team with experts from EIBI and Europa Nostra, and each project team will start the assessment and will undertake a mission, a rescue mission to these 7 selected sites. And this is a multidisciplinary team, and that will work in close cooperation with the nominator and with the owner and the local stakeholders, obviously, for this specific site. And the result of this mission and this assessment is a report, so technical and financial report, that will make available then on the website of Europa Nostra, and is a summary of recommendations and results of this assessment in order to improve the condition of the specific site. Then let's go and let's see how to prepare your nomination in a more technical, practical way. So first of all, you have already received in the chat the main link where you can find the call for nomination and nomination form on our website. Before that, obviously, we also suggest you to read on our website about the previous project, the FAQ, and to get to know a bit better the project. And then indeed call the call for nomination, read it, and the nomination form that needs to be filled Obviously, we also suggest that when you decide that you want to nominate your endangered site, you should start already locally. We call it reinforced contacts locally, meaning try to check on a local level and to try to seek local support for your nomination, which is very important. So very practically, how do I apply? So you should fill all parts of the nomination form. There is also at the end of the form a checklist that you can consult, so to make sure that you have included all the elements and the requested documents. And then you need to send your nomination by the 17th of September 2021. We have here some tips and common mistakes that we can share with you now during the webinar. So let's start with the tips. We always suggest to fill all parts of the nomination form, which seems obvious, but it's not. And also to send us, when you send your nomination, to try to put everything in one communication, in one email, because we might lose some documents. And then obviously send us the supplementary material, which can be maps or reports or previous correspondence articles related to the site that will be very helpful for the advisory panel and then the board members, in order to have a clearer picture of the site and to understand it in all its details. And of course, we also suggest in the nomination to try to keep the text, the short description that you have, the boxes of the nomination form, to keep the text quite to the point, concise, and not, I mean, just specify what is relevant to that endangered site and not adding too much of the details that are not closely related to the nomination. Also, remember to mention the European relevance of, in the context of the site in the description, which is very important. And indeed, be specific regarding what you think needs to be done in this project and what are the issues of the project itself. Now, I would like to give briefly again the floor to Guy for this slide, because it's a very important slide for us, which is related to the role of the nominator and the owner as well in these 7 most endangered projects, especially, of course, in case of selection. So Guy. Wait, you're muted. I'm muting you.
Okay, so now I think you can hear me. Indeed, it is important, first of all, for us, the crucial person, notably at the beginning, is the nominator. And the nominator, so to say, is important for us in year 1, but definitely also in year 2, 3, and whatever time it takes. At the same time, we must not forget, most sites also have an owner. And I'm well aware that there can be a difference between nominator and owner, down to the point where we have cases where the nominator does not even know the owner. That's rare, but still. And quite often, initially at least, the nominator will not be on the same wavelength than the owner, or I should perhaps rather say the owner will not be on the same wavelength as the nominator. That is fine, and that is not keeping us from selecting a project, but we must nevertheless see that once a project is selected, and if concrete things are to happen on the site in order to save it, you need to find some arrangement with the owner. Now that can happen, it normally happens in the process, but it is important to stress the role also of the owner, to say, whatever may be your nominator's relationship with the owner now, if it is a conflictive one or a less friendly one, be aware over time this has to change, because otherwise I don't see how the practical works on the site can progress. We will definitely help you in that. We will establish a number of contacts, etc. But it simply is worthwhile already at an early stage to think about this as a necessary stepping stone in a process in case of selection. I might even also recall to you, Sarah was mentioning the short list of up to 14 projects. It is astonishing how often the fact of being shortlisted also already helps in improving the situation of some sites. We have cases where the fact of being shortlisted has triggered an action which ultimately puts the project also on the saved list of projects, even though it was never finally selected among the 7. Another point perhaps to stress in this context is it is great that Europa Nostra is there and is helping, etc. But really, it is not us in The Hague or in Brussels, or I'm talking to you from Luxembourg. It's not from The Hague or Brussels or Luxembourg that you run a project. You either do it at the local level or it's not done. Meaning you make or break a project at the local level. You get our support, definitely, but it is not from a capital that you a European capital that you kind of run a project somewhere in the province in Europe, if I may say so. So from that point of view, that is either you can have enough local support and you yourself as nominator remain active. In that case, you get our help, but you have to be active. If not, I'm afraid we will not have a leverage which is large enough to run the project from more or less big distance. Thank you.
Thank you, Guy. So let's continue then with the next slide related to the audiovisual material. Well, this is also mentioned obviously in the nomination form towards the end. It's very practical, I would say, but we thought it was worth mention because it's important obviously to attach to your nomination. Part of the dossier is the audiovisual material, the photographs and images. And for us, you can read here, you know, all the size and dimension that we request. But overall, it's important that you submit to us photos that are suitable, in the sense that either they're free of rights or they are Creative Commons, and so free to use by like expressing the source and identifying the source, or you are the owner maybe of the photo, and so you just give us permission to use, or you contact the owner of the photos and you get a written approval to use these photos for non-commercial purposes. So just to just this slide on the audiovisual material, because it's important. We will need to use this audiovisual material for our communication and videos in case of shortlisting of the site or selection. So apart from being good photos, we also need photos that we can use, and so please check this. And then our last slide of the tips and common mistakes. Now it's related to the letters of recommendation. So as you can see, as you can read from the call for nomination, we ask at least 2 letters of recommendation, and in order to support your nomination and your project. And at least one should preferably come from a Europa Nostra related organization, so member, associate, or country representation, and it should be this letter either in English or in French, or with the translation. Now, it's important that in case you have issues or you cannot make contact with this Europa Nostra related organization in Europe or in your country, that you just come back to us, and we can discuss this case by case in order to find the best solution for these letters of recommendation. We don't want this to be a problem for your nomination. Obviously, what is important is that this recommendation cannot come from the nominator, so from you related, or and should be from somebody that knows the project. So obviously it depends from project to project, but it should be from a person that is or was involved, or at least know the context and the project.